let's just jump right into this, because we're looking at what is arguably the central, most recognizable puzzle of our modern era. Have you ever looked at a massive, glaring problem in your society, say failing public services, extreme inequality, or a severe housing crisis, and thought to yourself, everyone knows this is completely broken, so why on earth isn't anyone fixing it? We are exploring a companion piece to the third article in a series by Mozambican economist Antonio Francisco. He is analyzing a phenomenon where economic and political systems that clearly know what is wrong utterly fail to correct themselves.
It's incredibly frustrating, isn't it, when a society generates endless reports, parliamentary commissions, and mountains of data about a crisis. We really have to pause and ask ourselves why the fundamental structures remain completely intact year after year. It's clearly not a lack of knowledge or awareness. We are practically drowning in diagnoses. So what we are looking at is a profound structural failure of action. The system knows it's sick, but refuses to take the medicine.
Take the UK housing market as our grounding example for this. The staggering price-to-earnings ratios across the country highlight a system that has accumulated endless diagnoses from think tanks, academics, and politicians alike. Everyone agrees on the symptoms: high prices, unequal access, persistent pressure. Yet, the dysfunction persists. Nothing fundamentally changes. The mystery at this stage is no longer the diagnosis. We've got that covered. The true mystery we need to unpack is the persistence of the problem.
And we see a similar repeating pattern with regional stagnation. For instance, London's massive economic output entirely masks severe, deeply entrenched disparities across the rest of the UK. Without it, living standards would plummet. So if the diagnosis of this inequality is so crystal clear to absolutely everyone involved, why is the repetition of this blockage entirely rational to the system? Why does the system keep choosing to be stuck?
To really understand this, we need to turn to physicist David Deutsch. In his book, The Beginning of Infinity, he provides a highly useful framing by contrasting two different ways of explaining the world: the Greek myth of the seasons and the astronomical theory of Earth's axial tilt. In the myth, the goddess Demeter makes the Earth cold because her daughter Persephone is trapped in the underworld. Deutsch calls this an easy-to-vary explanation. Think about it. If the ancient Greeks traveled and learned that the seasons were reversed in the southern hemisphere, they could easily just tweak the myth. They could say, oh, well, Demeter moves her warmth down south when she's sad, or swap out a god here and an emotion there. The core story survives because you can just mold it to fit new facts. But the astronomical theory of the Earth's 23.5-degree axial tilt? That is hard to vary. All the mathematical and physical elements are functionally interdependent. If you alter a single piece of evidence or tweak the angle by a few degrees, the whole explanation completely shatters.
This distinction is absolutely crucial. The exact, lapidary criterion for a good explanation, according to Deutsch, is this: an explanation that is hard/easy to vary while still accounting for what it purports to account for. A good explanation must be hard to vary. So why does this matter for our society's political and economic blockages? Because pliable, easy-to-vary explanations merely neutralize criticism. They act like giant shock absorbers in our political systems, constantly shifting to accommodate new facts and changing forms without ever forcing real structural change. If an explanation can just morph to dodge criticism, it never has to actually solve the problem.
Which brings us to how this builds into a broader understanding of society. Economist Antonio Francisco synthesizes this epistemological concept, epistemology basically just being the study of how we know what we know, into what he proposes as the PDT framework. This is an attempt to construct a hard-to-vary explanation for why systems stop learning. He draws on three distinct thinkers. First, Karl Popper, representing the need for critical circulation. A system must allow for open criticism. Second, David Deutsch, for explanatory quality and the absolute demand for hard-to-vary explanations. And third, Nassim Taleb, for the asymmetric exposure to the costs of error, or what you might commonly hear called having skin in the game.
Now, looking at how this is modeled, notice that these three failures are not independent at all. They form a closed, self-sustaining loop. Neutralized critical circulation, pliable explanations, and externalized costs of error perfectly stabilize one another. It's like a three-legged stool. If you remove Popper's open critique, the framework is just a static description of the world. If you remove Deutsch, the criticism has no bite because the explanations just morph to avoid the attack. And if you remove Taleb, well, even if you have a perfectly accurate, hard-to-vary explanation, it never actually forces decision-makers to act simply because they aren't the ones paying the price for the error.
But we have to raise a real doubt here, right?
What exactly is the engine keeping this single machine running? It's one thing to say these three failures stabilize each other, but what drives them simultaneously, ensuring that the people at the top, making the decisions, never actually feel the consequences of their errors?
The framework attributes this driving engine to a dynamic called distributive capture. Let's unpack that a bit. This happens when the benefits of keeping things exactly as they are, like rising property values or asset stability, are highly concentrated among a specific, well-defined group. Because the benefits are concentrated, they provoke organized, fierce political action to block any reform. Meanwhile, the costs of this broken system, like slightly higher rents for everyone, lost productivity, reduced social mobility, are diffuse. They are spread out over millions of everyday people. And because the pain is spread so thin across so many, it leads only to collective inaction. This asymmetry is everything. It creates a distinct, rational chain reaction. Concentrated benefits lead directly to effective political mobilization and the successful blocking of reform. The winners fight hard to keep winning. On the flip side, diffuse costs lead to diffuse mobilization and ultimate inaction. The losers are too scattered to fight back effectively. It creates a highly stable equilibrium of non-reform. What this tells us, rather chillingly, is that the system isn't failing out of ignorance. It is functioning exactly by design to protect those concentrated benefits.
Before we go further, it is absolutely crucial to explicitly clarify that this framework takes no position on the optimal size of the state. This isn't a partisan left-wing or right-wing point. Distributive capture happens everywhere. It operates smoothly whether you have a large state with massive public patronage networks or a small state dominated by private monopolies capturing weak regulation. The sheer size of the government isn't the deciding factor here. It's the configuration of those three corrective axes we discussed earlier. Capture is an equal opportunity disease.
And we can see this architecture of inaction clearly outside the UK too. In Portugal, for example, the pattern is brutally clear and manifests as a deeply entrenched European pattern. The state actively cultivates real estate appreciation through highly favorable tax regimes and foreign capital attraction. The diagnosis of urban exclusion and lack of affordable housing is extremely well known by everyone there, but correcting it is completely paralyzed. Why? Because genuine reform would threaten a reliable, steady engine of continuous rent extraction for those concentrated beneficiaries. The machine protects itself.
Ultimately, we arrive back at our initial puzzle, but with a much sharper understanding. The real crisis is a profound structural decoupling, like two gears in a transmission that are no longer catching. On one side, you have the generation of diagnostic knowledge. We know what's wrong. On the other side, you have the actual execution of a correction, and those two gears are completely decoupled. Modern systems accumulate constraints and knowledge much faster than they generate the institutional capacity to actually act on them.
This specific paralyzed state is what Antonio Francisco formally defines as functional underdevelopment. It's so important to grasp that this is not an absence of knowledge. It's not simple poverty, and it's not a complete institutional collapse. Rather, it is the presence of knowledge, completely stripped of the capacity to make a corrective. The system remains formally functional, it's cognitively informed, and it might even be politically competitive on the surface, yet its actual self-correcting capacity has severely deteriorated.
Now keep in mind, the PDD framework is an analytical proposal, not an established academic consensus, and it is deliberately exposed to criticism, exactly as a hard-to-vary explanation should be. In the next part of this analysis, we will see this framework move from a theoretical concept to an active instrument. It will be tested empirically through a matrix of quadrants, and we'll see it applied to concrete, real-world cases, including the United Kingdom, South Africa, and Mozambique.
But for now, I want to leave you with this final thought. If a system produces endless knowledge but absolutely cannot make it corrective, is it truly learning? When our institutions act like highly competent analysts, drafting meticulous, accurate notes about combustion while the house burns down around them, what must we change about our explanations to finally force them to put out the fire? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those hard questions.